Back to the 70s, I kicked the commander and focused on college entrance exams. After failing the college entrance exam, Carrie spent 40 years supporting David as a perfect homemaker. She served her in-laws, raised her siblings and children, all while sacrificing her health to maintain the facade of a happy family. But David's dying wish was that she shouldn't attend his funeral, fearing she'd mess with his cycle of rebirth. Half of David's fortune went to their kids, the other half to the love of his life. Carrie was left with just a short letter. It turned out that David had taken Carrie's acceptance letter to fulfill his sweetheart's college dream, ruining Carrie's life. When Carrie had a breakdown and asked why, her children dismissed her. "You only got that acceptance letter by luck. Becky's talent surpasses yours. Besides, Dad and Becky were star-crossed lovers for 40 years. You've had enough respect. Embarrass Becky again, and we'll dump you in the countryside to fend for yourself." Carrie died of rage. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in her final year of high school, with her acceptance letter still in transit. Her life was just starting anew. In late fall of 2018, the solemn funeral hall was filled with flowers. People comforted a woman wearing a white flower and mourning clothes, and silently prayed for the youngest commander, whose portrait was on the memorial. Suddenly, a raspy shout came from outside. "I'm David's wife of 40 years. Why can't I attend his funeral?" Carrie pushed past the guards and froze as she entered, seeing the woman in the center. "Becky, why are you here?" This woman, who had occupied Carrie's husband's life for 4 decades, had now taken her rightful place even in death. Before Becky could speak, Ken and Lily rushed forward, shoving Carrie aside. "Mom, haven't you caused enough trouble? This is Dad's wish. You clung to him all his life. Won't you let him rest in peace?" Carrie stood there stunned. The lawyer sighed and spoke. "Carrie, this indeed was David's wish. He directed that after his death, half his estate goes to Becky, the other half to your children. He wanted you absent from his funeral." The lawyer's words struck Carrie like a bolt of lightning. She gasped, clutching his arm desperately. "Impossible. I spent 40 years married to David, tending to his family and raising our kids. How could he do this to me?" The lawyer, pitying her, handed her a letter. "This is the only thing David left for you." Carrie grabbed it, finding just a single line when she opened it. "The acceptance letter I took, I'm squaring up the 40 years with it." The familiar handwriting hit her like a sledgehammer, leaving her dizzy and breathless. Decades ago, the lack of that acceptance letter forced her to believe she failed the college entrance exam and marry David. Over the years, Becky basked in her glory, and even Carrie's children looked down on her lack of education. Outsiders mocked her without restraint. These grievances and injustices, she never should have borne them. Hatred surged within her, and she lunged at Becky, only to be shoved aside by her vigilant children. "You're still defending her? She stole my acceptance letter back then." Carrie's words were cut off by Ken. "An acceptance letter? You've been the commander's wife for years, isn't that enough? Dad and Becky were meant to be, and you messed that up. Keep acting up, and we'll send you to the countryside." Pain pierced her heart like a sword and Carrie collapsed, clutching her chest. People gasped in shock, but through the crowd, she saw her children comforting a shaken Becky, oblivious to their own mother's plight. As excruciating pain enveloped her, moments before dying again, Carrie shed tears of regret. If given another chance, she'd fiercely protect her acceptance letter to prevent anyone from stealing her new life. With the pain receding, she awoke to a bright light. Her heart pounded, and a familiar voice echoed nearby. "Carrie, Becky's not well. Can you help her out this time?" Instinctively, Carrie looked up and saw a young David, then glanced at her hands, thin dirt-stained, but without the calluses from years of housework. The village loudspeaker announced the date, December 7th, 1978. She'd really been given another chance, back before her acceptance letter was snatched. Her once lifeless eyes filled with determination. David moved to grab her hand, but Carrie instinctively slapped it away. Scarred by her past life, she retorted with newfound resolve. "What does Becky's health have to do with me? Did I make her sick? If you care, you do it. Stop ordering me around." Stunned, David stood there, wanting to say something as Carrie turned to leave. But when he blocked her path, she shouted, "Help! Someone's trying to harass me." David panicked and quickly reached out to cover Carrie's mouth, but Carrie bit his hand hard instead. The villagers who rushed over saw this and immediately hit David with a stick. Carrie took the chance to escape from David and hid behind Wendy. It was only then that everyone finally saw the two clearly. "Carrie, David, what are you doing here?" Carrie quickly took the initiative, grabbing Wendy's hand and said with a grievance, "Wendy, David said Becky was unwell and forced me to work for Becky. I refused and he tried to harass me." As she spoke, Carrie lowered her head, pretending to sob and look pitiful. Becky, who was originally just watching, panicked and said anxiously, "Carrie, what nonsense are you talking about? Can you deny that I did your work before?" Carrie lifted her head and immediately questioned, leaving Becky speechless. Becky was no longer the university professor that everyone praised. Pretending to be delicate and refusing to work, if reported, she would be far from returning to the city. David didn't expect Carrie to expose these things directly, and he glared at her fiercely. "Carrie, what nonsense are you spouting? You clearly helped on your own before. And now you're trying to throw dirt on Becky?" Hearing this, Carrie felt even more ironic. "I helped on my own, huh? Why didn't I help before, but started helping as soon as you came back? Because you forced me. It's fine if you care about Becky. Just cancel our marriage, and you can care about whoever you want." Seeing the two rendered speechless, Carrie felt extremely satisfied inside. In her past life, they ruined her. In this life, she would never repeat that mistake, and would preferably end this engagement straight away. Who knew that at this moment, a stern voice chastised them. "What nonsense is this?" The crowd turned to see Carrie's parents arriving. Upon seeing Carrie's father, David instantly felt reassured, his expression visibly easing. "Uncle." Carrie's father nodded at David, looking sternly at Carrie. "David is a soldier. Do you know how serious it is to falsely accuse him of harassment? And Becky, her reputation is ruined because of you. Do you even remember what you learned from your books? Hurry up and come back with me." Seeing Carrie's parents arrive, the crowd didn't want to get involved in their family matters, and quickly found excuses to leave. Carrie wanted to speak, but upon seeing her mother's pleading eyes, she fell silent. As soon as the crowd dispersed, Carrie's father gave her a fierce slap. "Get on your knees. What are you doing?" Carrie's mother rushed forward, shielding her daughter, speaking angrily. Neither David nor Becky expected Carrie's father to act so abruptly, and were both in shock. "What am I doing?" Carrie's father gestured at Carrie, scolding. "Did you hear what she just said? These days, who would say their fiancé harassed them? How is she going to get married in the future?" "I won't marry." At the mention of marrying David, Carrie reacted intensely. "You agreed that if I got into college, I wouldn't have to marry David. The exams just ended. The acceptance letters aren't even out. Why are you so sure I won't get in?" "Ridiculous." Carrie's father, boiling with anger, raised his hand again, but Carrie's mother quickly intervened to stop him. David furrowed his brow. He also felt Carrie deserved a lesson for being disobedient, but one slap should suffice. Anything more might make her resentful. Hence he spoke up. "Uncle, I believe Carrie just misunderstood my relationship with Becky. Let me explain it to her." Just as Carrie's father wanted to nod in agreement, Carrie's resistance grew stronger. "There's nothing to discuss. I will get into college. I refuse to marry you. Marry whoever you want." Before anyone could react, Carrie ran in the direction of her home. Her moment of defiance resulted in her father's discipline. With a creak, Carrie's mother gently opened the door, bringing freshly prepared herbal paste to Carrie's bedside. Seeing the bruises on Carrie's arms, she spoke with heartache. "Carrie, why are you so stubborn? Your dad wants you to marry David because he's a good man." Lying face down on her bed, Carrie replied with a hoarse voice. "He thinks David is so great that he sees all my faults." Carrie's father and David's father grew up together, sharing a brotherly bond. Later, they both encountered a mountain flood. Carrie's father luckily grabbed hold of a tree and survived, but David's father ended up with crippled legs. Without David's father as a laborer, plus the cost of treatment, their resources quickly dwindled. Carrie's father felt guilty for not saving David's father, and suggested the two families should unite through marriage. It was only because of Carrie's grandfather's dying request that her father agreed that, if Carrie got into college, the marriage wouldn't have to proceed, and all support would come from him alone. In her past life, Carrie mistakenly believed she failed the college entrance exams and had to marry David. After marriage, she witnessed David and Becky being entangled, causing her to cry, argue, and ultimately think about divorce. Every time she was broken and in pain, it was brushed off by her father's light remark, "You failed the entrance exam. It's your fate." The word fate burdened Carrie her entire life. It wasn't until her deathbed that she realized her life shouldn't have been this way. Given a second chance by fate, she was determined to change the past's outcome. Early the next morning, despite her injuries still healing, Carrie hurried to the village post house. When Carrie heard Mike say there was no letter for her, a flash of disappointment crossed her face. She quickly stuffed the pastries she was holding into Mike's hands. "Mike, can you please keep an eye out for me? If there's a letter for me, don't give it to anyone else, okay?" Mike didn't understand why, but he nodded in agreement. Carrie remembered that college acceptance letters were supposed to be coming out soon. She wasn't sure how David intercepted her letter in her past life, so she was determined to prevent the same thing from happening again. With that big worry off her mind, she finally exhaled a breath of relief. But as she turned around, she unexpectedly ran into David standing nearby watching her. "Carrie, what are you doing at Mike's?" he asked. Carrie turned her head away, mocking him. "Well, what's it to you? If you have time to worry, you should focus on whether Becky can finish her work. Otherwise, you'll feel bad when she gets called out." David's expression turned cold, and he directly reprimanded Carrie. "Carrie, I've told you so many times. Becky's dad saved my life. I'm just trying to repay him. Why can't you understand? It's a completely innocent friendship. I'll marry you when the time comes." These high-sounding words, Carrie had heard them countless times. In her past life, she was shackled by her father's debt of gratitude, forced into marriage, and then by David's debt to Becky's dad. She had to endure Becky's mistreatment until it eventually killed her with frustration. But why should she have to go through that? Looking David in the eye, she said, "Why? Did I owe Becky's dad my life? The debt wasn't mine, so why bring me into it now? David, stop saying you'll marry me. I'm getting into college. Do whatever you want with Becky." With that, Carrie turned and left without looking back. David watched her retreating figure, a weird feeling stirring inside him. The village wasn't big, and Carrie's change of attitude quickly spread. Everyone knew Carrie now despised David. Alongside that, rumors about Becky and David circulated too. People didn't particularly like or dislike Becky, but she often shirked work or dumped it on others, which left a bad impression. Now tangled with someone who was engaged, more whispers about her arose. Despite her denials, people saw David's special treatment and didn't believe her. Carrie wasn't bothered by all this. As the day for acceptance letters approached, she stayed extra vigilant. Unexpectedly, it was Becky who found her first, not David. "Carrie, I need to talk to you," Becky said, looking troubled. Carrie sneered, "Why not have David come find me? Isn't he supposed to look after his savior's daughter?" Carrie knew what kind of person Becky really was. In her past life, Becky was cunning, getting others to do the dirty work for her while appearing innocent. Though Carrie knew it was Becky behind the taunts, evidence was always elusive, and David would always side with Becky. It was the first time Becky was facing Carrie directly. Becky's face turned grim at Carrie's words, but she persisted. "David and I are clean. Can you clear things up and say it's just you and David having a spat?" Seeing Carrie unmoved, Becky bit her lip and asked Carrie, "Throwing a tantrum doesn't mean David's fallen for you. Watch out or you might regret it." Dusting off her clothes, Carrie scoffed, "If it keeps David far away from me, I'd be thrilled." Unexpectedly, Becky gave a strange smile and said, "Oh really?" In the next moment, she lunged at Carrie. Startled, Carrie dodged aside, not expecting Becky to stumble and fall down the nearby slope. "Ah, Becky!" A scream sounded nearby, and Carrie turned to see David's fiery gaze on her. David had intended to have a serious talk with Carrie, but his arrival coincided with Carrie supposedly pushing Becky down. He'd thought Carrie didn't care anymore, but now it seemed more like she was just stubborn and mean. Before Carrie could explain, David rushed to Becky's side and picked her up. Carrie tried to speak, but David roughly brushed her aside, holding Becky tight. Haven't you had enough? Carrie, this is between us. Why drag Becky into it? Accusing her of something she didn't do made Carrie's face darken. David, I didn't push her, she fell. I don't want to hear your excuses. David interrupted, glaring at her protectively. If anything happens to Becky, I won't forgive you. With that, he hurried away, leaving Carrie standing there in a huff. But before she stewed too long, Carrie remembered she had something important to do, rushing off to a small grove nearby. Upon finding an unconscious middle-aged man there, she finally sighed with relief. In her past life, she had unknowingly saved the life of a collapsed man while working. That man turned out to be Felix, a significant figure in the military. David climbed the ranks over time, thanks largely to Felix. Carrie saved Felix this time, not only hoping to prevent a strong-willed soldier from dying unexpectedly, but also to make sure David's rise wouldn't be so smooth. With that in mind, Carrie applied some first aid just like in a previous life. Soon enough, the man slowly woke up and was beyond thankful to learn that Carrie had saved him. Little lady, since you helped me out, if there's anything you need from me, just say the word. What's your name? Carrie was startled but then chuckled. Carrie. You don't owe me anything, it was nothing. Leaving those words behind, Carrie turned and walked away. She believed Felix would eventually trace everything back to David. And then, any hope of David's smooth rise like before would be just wishful thinking. Feeling relieved from a nagging concern, Carrie headed over to the postal station. She was thrilled upon hearing she had mail. Really? Mike, where's my stuff? Thinking she'd get it right away, she was surprised when Mike said, Didn't your dad take it? Hearing this, an uneasy feeling crept up on Carrie. She rushed home, only to find David's family there. Carrie froze, frowning. Why are you all here? Her dad took a long drag on his tobacco pipe and said with a stern expression, Why? We're here to discuss your marriage to David. Those words hit Carrie like a ton of bricks, and before long she rushed up to her dad, yelling, No. I held up my end of the deal. I got into college. Why are you forcing me to marry David? Dad, Mike said you took my mail, give it back. That's my acceptance letter. Her dad pushed her away, still with that stern look. Without that letter, you might as well marry David. Carrie was taken aback for a moment. An insane thought crossed her mind as she trembled. Dad, what do you mean? Without that letter? That's my acceptance letter. You promised Grandpa that if I got into college, you wouldn't force me to marry David. College. Suddenly, her dad stood up in anger. You're so caught up in books you don't see the truth. What's college gonna get you? As a girl, you're gonna get married anyway. David's doing great in the army and has a bright future. What do you mean no one's forcing you? You're here because you pushed Becky down the hill in spite. Do you know how serious that is? You could end up in jail. Carrie felt her blood boil as she slowly turned to David, who'd been silent all along. So David, this is your doing, right? You're framing me to force me to marry you. So who's getting my acceptance letter? Is your sweet sister Becky gonna take my place at college? David's anger flared up at this. Carrie was the one who did something wrong. He was trying to keep her out of jail, negotiating on her behalf. And yet, Carrie had the audacity to slander Becky like that. Thinking about it, David's face darkened as he snapped, Carrie, how many times do I have to say it? Becky and I are clean, stop making stuff up. You're the one who pushed Becky. This is restitution for her. If you can't go to college, why not let someone else have a chance? I'm ready to marry you. What more do you want? Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Carrie slapped David across the face. Who asked you to marry me? Carrie was shaking, glaring at David with hatred. I want to go to college and have my own life, my own future. Who do you think you are to decide that for me? Nobody expected Carrie to lash out like that. Even David, who always thought he knew Carrie best, was taken aback and wordless when met with her angry stare. This was the first time David realized that Carrie didn't look at him with happiness anymore, but rather with resentment. Yet before he could fully grasp that thought, he quickly rejected it. No way. Carrie couldn't hate him. David's mom snapped out of it first, rushing over to check on his cheek before shrieking. Is this what you've raised? Don't forget your husband lost his legs because of you people, and you're the ones who wanted to join our families. Now my son's been hit by your daughter, and you think you can just let this go? Before Carrie's dad could speak, Carrie cut in. Yeah. So you'd better tell your son not to marry me. Because if he sabotages my college plans, your family won't have it easy. Let's see who has the upper hand. David's mom, furious, lunged at Carrie, ready to retaliate. But David blocked his mom and said resolutely, Mom, this is between me and Carrie. Stay out of it. Besides, I'm definitely marrying Carrie. David's firm stance left his mom speechless with frustration. And Carrie's dad yelled out, Carrie, where did everything you've learned disappear to? What's wrong with you? David's great to you. Why are you causing a scene? I'm asking one more time. Are you marrying or not? No. Carrie wiped away her tears fiercely, glaring at everyone in the room. I will go to college. Even if it means death, I will not marry David. Her father, livid, dragged her, gripping so hard like a vice that it hurt. She struggled but was thrown into her room. Bang! The door slammed shut. Carrie instinctively ran to the door, trying to open it, only to find it locked from outside. No matter how hard she fought it, the door wouldn't budge. Dad, what are you doing? Let me out. Carrie shouted. I don't want to get married. I want to study. The sound of keys jingling echoed as Carrie's father spoke firmly. This isn't up to you. Think it over, and then we can discuss leaving the room. Carrie didn't expect her father to be so adamant. She banged on the door, begging for release. With no response from her father, Carrie gritted her teeth and yelled, David, get my dad to let me out. I won't marry you. If you push me, don't blame me if I take us both down. Her words stunned everyone outside the door. David's mom cursed Carrie, but surprisingly David, who had always been vague about the marriage, was firm this time. This marriage is happening, whether you like it or not. The acceptance letter was Becky's. Once she's off to college, I'll persuade your dad to let you out. David looked at the closed door one last time, suppressing his unease, and left with his mother. Carrie refused to accept her fate. She screamed curses at David until there was silence, and no one responded to her. After shouting for so long, Carrie collapsed on the floor, defeated. Memories flooded back of how hard she had worked to change her past life's outcome. She never imagined her closest family would hurt her the most. In this life, her father took her acceptance letter. But in her last life, did her parents really not know it was Becky's? Or did they give it away? Since the engagement, they always hoped for Carrie to marry David. Despite giving David and Becky numerous chances to be together in this life, David chose to bind himself to Carrie, all for Becky. Carrie was filled with powerlessness and resentment but felt lost. Her father was determined to teach her a lesson, locking her in the room without food or water for 3 days and nights. On the 4th night, weak and lying in bed, she finally heard a sound at the door. Her mother came in with food, her face full of worry. Carrie, just apologize to your dad. Why be so stubborn? Her mother urged. Carrie grabbed her mother's hand, pleading, Mom, I don't want to marry. I want to study. Please talk to Dad. I can work and earn money to repay them, but don't give my acceptance letter away. Her mother pushed away Carrie's hand, avoiding her gaze. Your dad gave it to Becky as compensation. Everyone knows about the bride price your dad took. If you don't marry David, your dad's reputation will be ruined. Carrie was stunned. Mom, are you and Dad forcing me? You know I can't watch you get blamed. This is why you accepted the bride price and spread the word to force me to marry David? Why? Am I not your real daughter? Her mother hastily held her hand. Carrie, we're not trying to harm you. Your dad is right. Every girl gets married eventually. David is a good boy. He won't mistreat you. Just trust us, okay? Not mistreat. In her past life, David certainly wasn't bad. He treated her nicely, making her doubt her suspicions about him and Becky. But have you thought about how they treat me? Carrie asked, holding on to hope. Will I really have a good life if I marry into their family? Do you and Dad have to force me? Her mother hesitated, then reassured her. You will have a good life. I wasn't welcomed at first either, but I turned out fine. Carrie, things will be better. All hope extinguished, Carrie felt soulless. She heard her own voice say softly, I'll listen to you and Dad. Her mother's face lit up with relief. Good. I'll tell your dad. We'll start planning the wedding. But before leaving, her mother turned back and asked, Carrie, are you really okay with marrying David and not going to college? Carrie said nothing, silently eating the food her mother brought. Her father didn't quite believe Carrie would agree so easily, but seeing her compliant, he accepted it. How many times do I have to say this? A girl doesn't need a lot of education. Marry well, and David won't let you down. Perhaps because Carrie seemed obedient, her usually stern father showed a rare hint of kindness. Yet Carrie knew better. Whatever her father told the villagers, their scrutinizing eyes followed her more closely. Even when she occasionally went to the ox cart, she was quickly sent away. Your dad said we absolutely can't take you away. Otherwise, if something happens to you, he'll come looking for us. The village is far from town. We usually rely on the village's ox cart to go out. Carrie's dad was clearly dead set on marrying her off to David, even guarding against her running away. Carrie turned around, only to be blocked by Becky. Why are you running away like a stray dog? Carrie turned around, staring at Becky. The world has really changed. Even thieves can openly show up on the road. Becky, just because you have my acceptance letter, you think everything's fine? Becky's expression shifted, but she refused to back down. Carrie, do you think you can scare me with that? Let me tell you, David promised me he'll keep a close eye on you. You think he's marrying you for something else? It's just to keep an eye on you. You can't leave the village, and I have your acceptance letter. You should just watch me go to college. To Carrie, such arrogant words sounded a bit like bluffing. So, why flaunt yourself in front of me now? Did David give you my acceptance letter, but also set some condition? You feel like David's getting out of your control, so you rush to drive a wedge between us? After all, I'll be the one with David in the future. He might just get heated one night and report you. Becky's face changed. Her eyes filled with hatred as she looked at Carrie. David wouldn't dare. He promised to take care of me forever. He's marrying you just to monitor you. I chuckled sarcastically. Then why are you so frantic? Becky couldn't say anything back, running off in anger. Carrie stood her ground, closing her eyes. Since you're here, why are you hiding? David stepped out from behind a tree, looking at Carrie seriously. You shouldn't have said those things to Becky. I won't let you stop her from going to college. But I promise that after we get married, you won't be mistreated. David couldn't understand why Carrie, who always trusted him, was arguing with him over Becky this time. Carrie was getting impatient. David, are you done pretending? I won't be mistreated as long as you're not around. Seeing Carrie's indifferent expression, David tightened his grip, blurting out words long buried in his heart. Do you really not want to marry me? Carrie wondered if she was going crazy, detecting a hint of grievance in his words. She laughed mockingly, looking at David. Does it matter if I want to or not? If I don't, would you tell my dad you won't go through with it? Even though it was a question he needed to ask, hearing it made David regret asking. David suppressed his feelings and moved to grab Carrie's hand, but she dodged. We're not married yet, so keep your distance. The bitterness in David's heart grew, and he couldn't help but ask. Carrie, what's wrong? Why are you treating me this way all of a sudden? Didn't you like me? Carrie looked up at David, annoyed. So what? Is liking you a permanent commitment? Do I have to be at your beck and call like a servant? Wake up. You want this marriage. Let's not pretend anymore. If you're not happy, just call it off. David didn't know what to say, only reassuring himself that things would be better after marriage. If you're hung up about what happened with Becky, I will show after the wedding there's nothing improper between us. No need. Carrie spoke coldly. I don't care whom you're with. Looking at Carrie's distant demeanor, David felt a wave of panic. He knew Carrie liked him, or she wouldn't have agreed to his requests repeatedly. But her sudden change made him realize her affection was fragile compared to attending school. For the first time, he felt a sense of dissatisfaction. The marriage he once disliked now gave him some consolation. The outside world is not easy to venture into. He would strive to give Carrie a good life, and the acceptance letter was best left to Becky. The wedding was initially set for a month later, but then David had military duties and needed to return earlier. Before the marriage license approval, the families arranged to go ahead with the ceremony. Carrie wasn't very involved in the wedding preparations, but David insisted on involving her in every decision. The villagers saw this and remarked how Carrie found a good man. Carrie, annoyed by these comments, couldn't help speaking up. Can you give me some space? I'm not going anywhere. David paused, suppressing the ache in his heart. So you think me taking you to see our wedding preparations is just a cover to keep an eye on you? What else? Carrie glared at David disdainfully. Don't tell me you honestly want to marry me and live happily ever after? David, it's just us now. No need for pretense. An indescribable pain spread from David's chest. He only wanted more time together, but hearing Carrie's words made him release his clenched hand, stubbornly replying, You're right. It's all pretense. But even if it is, you still have to stay with me forever. Carrie, you can't run. After saying this, David left hastily, like a deserter. From that day on, David avoided seeing Carrie for several days. On the wedding day, Carrie put on her new dress. As soon as she opened the door, she bumped right into David, who was there to escort the bride. The villagers saw the two newlyweds not talking and assumed they were just shy. They started joking around to lighten the mood, bowing, serving tea. After the ceremony, everyone took their seats, raising their glasses to toast the happy occasion. Carrie, for once, seemed in a good mood, standing next to David, continuously refilling his drink. Carrie's father had also drunk a bit too much and was gripping David's shoulder with advice. I only have one daughter. Son-in-law, you better take good care of her. David, a bit tipsy, nodded. Maybe it was the alcohol, but when he looked at Carrie, his gaze held a bit of enchanting affection. Yet the next moment, his words shattered the illusion. Don't worry, Dad. As long as Carrie doesn't go after Becky, I'll be good to her. No one found anything wrong with what he said. Instead, Carrie's father even shouted for Carrie to stop being so jealous. Carrie just nodded without arguing, constantly pouring them drinks. By midnight, many people staggered home drunkenly. Carrie's mother helped her drunken father back home, and Carrie supported a tipsy David to their room, not forgetting to shoo away several people, including David's mom, who tried to take care of him. The smell of alcohol was overwhelming. Just as Carrie was about to leave, David grabbed her and pulled her into a tight embrace. Carrie, where you going? Carrie saw she couldn't break free and sighed. I'm just getting you a warm towel and maybe some water. We're married already. What else do you need to do? Carrie was about to forcefully pull David's hand away when she heard him suddenly ask, Right, married. Married is good. Carrie, do you like me? His question carried a hopeful note, leaving Carrie silent for a moment before quietly replying, I like you. The lightness of those two words seemed to instantly calm David, and he relaxed, closing his eyes tightly, yet still muttering for Carrie to take care. Standing by the bed, Carrie waited until the mumblings faded before finally speaking. But that was in a past life. David, in this life, let's never meet again. She wiped the hand David touched and turned away without hesitation. The village was eerily quiet at night, the incessant chirping of insects sounding like an urgent, unsettling call to action. She ran, sweating heavily, and every little rustling sent her into holding her breath. The cold wind seeped into her neck, pulling sharp pains through her chest. Finally, Carrie reached the haystack next to the house, where she found the bundle she'd hidden for so long. The moment she saw it, she breathed a sigh of relief and flung it across her back, ready to leave when a voice suddenly called behind her. Carrie. Carrie stiffened, turning around to see her mother with teary eyes. Mom. The two of them stood facing each other for a long time until Carrie finally put her bundle down, closed her eyes, and said, Even if you call someone to catch me now, no matter when or how many times they lock me up or how hungry I'll be, I won't give up escaping. My life shouldn't be tied down here. I should see the wider world, fulfill my potential. Dad always says marrying was my fate, but I don't accept it. Carrie hadn't expected her mother to let her go. She knew better than anyone how soft her mother's nature was, and how she never dared to defy Carrie's dad. She didn't blame her mom, only herself for not being more thorough. But suddenly, she felt a heavy weight on her shoulder. Looking up, she met her mother's wet eyes as she placed the bundle back on Carrie's shoulder. I haven't read much, not like you and your dad, and I don't get the whole fate thing. Her mother said, I've listened to your dad for so many years. Maybe it's time I listen to something else. Today is just the day my daughter got married, so I'm just taking a walk. Carrie's heart trembled, and she instinctively grabbed her mom's hand. Mom, Her mom held Carrie's hand back and gently asked, Have you arranged everything? The acceptance letter? Before her mom could ask more, Carrie nodded. Everything's set, Mom, don't worry. I'll be back to pick you up once I've sorted everything out. She wanted to spend more time with her mom, but her mom pushed her away. It's getting late. Go quickly. Wait any longer, and someone might find out. Understanding the urgency, Carrie held back her tears, hugged her mom once more, then turned and ran down the small path without looking back. She kept running until she finally saw a small car and stopped. The door opened, revealing a handsome young man. Seeing Carrie hesitate, he stepped aside and said, Carrie, my name's Nolan. Felix is my dad. Don't worry, my dad gave me all the instructions. I'll get you out safely. Nolan? Carrie recalled the name. In her past life, Nolan was David's rival, always at odds with him in the military. But she also remembered the time she and Becky were kidnapped, and David chose Becky over her. It was Nolan who risked everything to save her life. People said she got lucky marrying David, living a life of luxury and wealth. Only Nolan mocked David for not knowing how lucky he was. She never imagined she'd meet Nolan so early in this life. Thank you, she said. Nolan, now only in his 20s, looked a bit bashful at the words. It's nothing, you're my dad's savior after all. Here's your train ticket heading north. I've already informed the school, your acceptance letter is void now. But someone will lead you through the registration process once you're there. If you need anything else, just let me know. Holding the ticket, Carrie thought for a moment, then gathered the courage to say, actually, there's one thing I'd like to ask of you. The car sped through, racing toward the first light of dawn, traveling alongside the rising sun. The morning light barely broke, and a slightly damp cold breeze slipped in through the window, rustling the wedding decorations on the door. The soft noise with the cold breeze woke up David from his hangover. Instinctively, he reached out beside him, only to find nothing but cold sheets. In a split second, his muddled mind cleared, and he shot up in bed. The throbbing pain from the hangover made him hold his head. He squinted around the room. No water cup, no basin. Everything seemed normal. If it weren't for the wedding decor on the wall, and the new clothes he was wearing, he might have thought yesterday's wedding was a dream. But it wasn't a dream. Where's Carrie? A strange panic washed over him. Ignoring his headache, David forced himself up and opened the door. He searched the hall, kitchen, guest room, everywhere around, but no sign of Carrie. David's mother, who had just woken up, saw him rushing about and asked, puzzled, David, what are you looking for? On instinct, David turned to his mom, then hurried over, asking, Mom, have you seen Carrie? His mom frowned impatiently, saying, how would I see her? Maybe she just thought the new daughter-in-law should serve her in-laws, and got up early to make breakfast. I'm telling you, women need proper guidance. Before she could finish, David dashed back inside, and woke up John and Lucy. Have you seen your sister-in-law? The two kids exchanged glances and shook their heads. David's mother, who followed them in, sensed something wasn't right. David, what do you mean? Carrie was with you, wasn't she? Did she run away or something? Mom, David suddenly snapped, glaring at her. Carrie wouldn't leave. Maybe I just neglected her when I got drunk. She might have gone home in a huff. I'm going to find her. Even as he said this, the emptiness in his heart seemed to widen. He and Carrie grew up together. He prided himself on knowing her best. Carrie cherished past ties and wouldn't want others to worry about her. She'd never disappear without a word. But when David hurried to Carrie's father to apologize, all he got was confusion. David, what's this about? Why are you saying sorry out of the blue? David stood stunned, asking, Dad, Carrie didn't come home? Crash. A loud noise came from behind. Carrie's mom dropped a water basin and dashed to David, questioning him. David, what do you mean? Why would Carrie come back? Wasn't she supposed to be at your place? Did you do something that drove her away? Hearing this, Carrie's father also lost his calm. David, explain what's going on. Soon, news of Carrie's disappearance spread through the village. Villagers helped search for her. But after combing through the village, there wasn't a single trace of Carrie. All her clothes, personal items, and even her college acceptance letter were still there. But Carrie seemed to have vanished into thin air. Married yesterday, missing today. David's mom wasn't happy, demanding an explanation from Carrie's father. But Carrie's father, usually tolerant of David's mother, lost his composure, convinced they did something that made Carrie, usually obedient, disappear. The two families quarreled non-stop, while David, stuck in the middle, had no mind to mediate. The village was isolated, and walking out of it on foot would take forever. The only means of transport was a cart. Worried about Carrie's safety, David searched meticulously, eventually finding cart tracks in a little path. The tracks led to the station, so David used his military connections to seek Carrie's whereabouts. Without a photo, he could only describe her verbally, staying at the station for 7 days, asking everyone. On the 8th day, a homeless man near the station told David, "The girl you described is quite pretty, with a mole by her eye. 8 mornings ago, she got on a train with a young guy. They seemed like a loving couple." Before the man finished, David retorted furiously, "You're talking nonsense. Carrie wouldn't leave with someone else. Stop slandering her. If I hear you say that again, I'll break your legs." After that, David fled in embarrassment. Even in his room, the vagabond's parting words echoed in his mind. "Kid, forced things don't work. If she loves someone else, she'd rather run away to avoid you. Why hold on?" David wanted to explain he wasn't holding on. It was Carrie who liked him first. On their wedding day, Carrie showed no signs of anything wrong. She dressed willingly, followed him, poured him drinks, and accepted congratulations like a thoughtful wife. But he forgot one thing. Carrie wasn't the compliant type. Blinded by happiness, when she offered to fetch him water while he was drunk, he naively thought they were fine. David thought Carrie had come around. As happy as he was then, he was just as furious now, knowing the truth, angry that Carrie changed her mind, angry he'd been fooled by such poor acting. He wanted to find Carrie and ask why she didn't want to marry him, why she couldn't just say it straight. But then it hit him. Carrie had told him, and more than once. He had brushed it off as a jealous rant, and thought everything would be fine once they were married. David never imagined Carrie would simply choose to run away. Lying in bed, he felt that familiar throb in his temple. The jumble of thoughts left him restless, so he closed his eyes, trying hard to fall asleep. For 3 days straight, David didn't eat or drink, locking himself away in his room. His family was worried sick, but no matter how much they knocked or pleaded, David wouldn't open the door. Left with no choice, David's mom called Becky. Becky had always hated being the backup plan, but she had no one in the village, and if David abandoned her, life would only get tougher. After some thought, Becky decided to go. She dressed up carefully that day, and there was a trace of pity in her knock. "David, it's Becky. I know you're worried about Carrie, but you can't just lock yourself up and stop eating. Please open the door." Becky waited a long time, but David didn't respond. Feeling David's mother's disapproving gaze, Becky bit her lip, her resentment towards Carrie deepening. It was all Carrie's fault. If she hadn't caused this scene, Becky wouldn't be ignored by David or suspected by the villagers. Seeing that David really wasn't going to respond, Becky took a deep breath and said, "David, the university registration is coming up. I'm a little scared to go alone. Can you take me?" Mentioning the university, the door suddenly opened. David, with dark circles under his eyes, stared at Becky for a long time before finally speaking. "All right." Hearing David agree, Becky was thrilled and immediately grabbed his arm with excitement. "Really? David, you're the best." As he looked at Becky holding onto his arm, David found it oddly annoying for the first time. He couldn't help but think about the village rumors, and wondered if Carrie would have run away without Becky's presence. But he quickly shoved the thought aside. Becky was the daughter of the man who saved his life. It wasn't Carrie who should be upset. It had nothing to do with Becky. Plus, at the university, there was a chance Carrie might be there too. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of a train whistle abruptly woke Carrie from her sleep. She looked out at the barren landscape, clutching her bundle. 3 days and nights on the train wasn't pleasant, and being her first time traveling far, she couldn't relax her tense nerves. When she fled the village, Nolan wanted to send her straight to the university registration office. But Carrie suddenly changed her mind. The university was good, but it wasn't her dream school. She left in a hurry, bringing only personal items and documents. Without much money, she had no way to cover tuition or living expenses. Nolan and his father had helped her a lot already. Asking more would be shameless. Moreover, Whether it was her parents or David, they all knew she got into this university. If they came looking, she might dodge them for a while, but not forever. By then, there's no second Nolan to save her. Most importantly, remembering her past life, she knew the economic reform was coming soon. Instead of studying, she'd rather try her hand at business and prepare to take the entrance exam again for her ideal university. Carrie understood her decision was risky. In her past life, she accepted her fate after thinking she failed her entrance exam, marrying David, and taking care of the household. Although she had her ambitions and wanted to strike out, David wouldn't allow it. He said, "Providing for the family is a man's job. What's it got to do with a woman? Just stay home and take care of mom and the others." David's mom wasn't well, and the younger siblings needed looking after, leaving Carrie with no choice but to stay home. She hoped to work after their siblings grew, but then she got pregnant, and young kids need their mom. By the time both kids grew up, David was already promoted, having a strong standing in the military. As a military wife, she had to be careful not to bring any scandal. Thus, her dreams of having a career were dashed once again. For 40 years, everyone envied Carrie for being a lifelong homemaker with a worry-free life, a high-ranking husband and successful kids. Yet Carrie felt unsatisfied countless times. But under the pressure and scrutiny of everyone, she fooled herself into believing it wasn't that bad. After all, everyone lived this way. But it wasn't until David's funeral, despite knowing he'd betrayed her for years, that she realized how foolish her sacrifices and self-deceptions had been. No one cared about a woman who lost her identity. In their eyes, she was the obedient daughter of her parents, the polite daughter-in-law of David's mom, David's wife for life, and Ken and Lily's mom. Everyone remembered her as someone's something, forgetting her name was Carrie. She was Carrie, not a daughter, not a wife, not a mother. Given another chance, Carrie didn't want her life filled with regrets. Thinking of this, she pressed a hand to her heart, telling herself, how much worse could it get? When the train stopped, Carrie followed the crowd and disembarked in City A. Different from the bustling city she remembered, City A was still just a small, dingy town. But in Carrie's eyes, it was a brand new start. What Carrie didn't expect was that soon after getting off the train, she discovered her bundle had a big hole, and all her money was gone. She wanted to report it to the police, but had no idea where the station was. Carrie asked the folks passing by, but in City A, where development hadn't reached yet, everyone only spoke the local dialect. Carrie couldn't understand them, nor could they understand her. Several times while asking for help, she almost burst into tears, but held it together each time. Store by store, she kept asking around until she finally found a shop where someone could speak Mandarin. The owner of the shop was Linda. Her husband had passed away, and her children had left long ago with no news from them. She ran a sewing shop to make a living. Linda had a loud voice, and her slim body looked fierce, making others a bit wary of her. When Linda learned that Carrie had been robbed and was looking for work, she stared at Carrie for a while before speaking in broken Mandarin. "I'm too old to bend, and there's a room here that's never been cleaned. Clean it and I'll pay you." Carrie quickly agreed, and she followed Linda through an alley to a small attic. The room Linda talked about was actually a cluttered storeroom at the top of the stairs. Dust filled the air as soon as she opened the door. The small, broken window let in only a sliver of light, and the room was piled high with various junk. After leaving Carrie to it, Linda just left. Carrie looked at the mess in front of her, rolled up her sleeves, and gritted her teeth. She started to organize the room, moving things out bit by bit, cleaning them, and even fixing some of the broken items. From morning till night, Carrie didn't know how long she'd been cleaning, but she finally managed to tidy up the whole room. Once she was done, she sat on the floor exhausted, massaging her aching limbs. But then she noticed Linda standing at the door, as if she had been watching for a while. Carrie quickly stood up. "Linda, what do you think? Is it good enough?" Linda glanced around, and then turned her back. "I need a helper here. I can't pay, but I'll cover your meals and lodging. If you're good with that, you can stay." Carrie was stunned for a moment, before realizing what Linda meant. Overjoyed, she thanked her repeatedly. After they had dinner, Carrie finally got to lay down in her room. The air was damp, and as she covered her eyes with her hand, the soreness in her limbs made her not want to move at all. The first day in City A had been full of unexpected events. Whether it was good or bad, she couldn't quite tell. Carrie lowered her hand and looked through the narrow window. The night sky was filled with stars, shining brightly. Watching them, the aches in her body seemed to ease a little. She opened the window, closed her eyes, and let the cool breeze calm her restless mind. It can't get worse, Carrie, she thought. With that in mind, she fell into a deep sleep. Early the next morning, Carrie went to Linda's sewing shop. She organized fabric, greeted customers, and assisted with tasks. Soon, the neighbors knew there was a pretty young girl helping out at the quirky sewing shop. Linda's sewing skills were excellent, but her odd personality made people keep their distance. Now that Carrie was around, everyone started handing their clothes and requests to her. Linda noticed all this and while working the sewing machine quipped, "They sure do seem to like you a lot." Carrie set down the clothes she was holding and with a smile, replied, "What good's liking me? It's really thanks to your expert handiwork, Linda. Just look how pretty it all turns out." Linda didn't say anything. Carrie coaxed and persuaded until Linda pretended to be stern. "What are you still standing around for? Go attend to the customers." After staying with Linda for 2 weeks, Carrie got used to Linda's tough exterior but soft heart. Things felt more natural between them, and Carrie even asked Linda to teach her the local dialect. Meanwhile, Carrie wandered around whenever she had free time, getting a basic understanding of City A. But she had no idea what kind of business to start until one day, while cleaning, she came across some leftover fabric scraps. A new idea popped into her head. After finding out the scraps were useless to Linda, Carrie collected them, cut and stitched them into headbands. Once finished, Carrie used her break time to head to the market, where she sold them. With so many people around, the headbands were a hit. Seeing the money she made, Carrie let out a genuine smile. Whether for school or business, she knew she needed a lot of money, and the more she earned, the more confident she felt. Just as Carrie was planning to seriously ramp up her efforts, she noticed a missing person alert on a TV near the market. Carrie, female, 19 years old. Her blood seemed to freeze instantly. She had thought no one except her parents would care about her running away. This missing person alert had David's fingerprints all over it. Carrie couldn't understand why David would insist on haunting her like this. Was he resentful because she made Nolan toss out that acceptance letter? Was he really this bitter over Becky that he hated Carrie so much? Her heart felt like it was boiling over with pain and resentment, washing over her completely. There was nothing she could do but run to a secluded spot, letting big tears roll down her face. She cried for a long time, only stopping when the sky darkened. After thinking it through, Carrie chose to sell her headbands in less crowded areas. But with fewer people, sales dropped, and sometimes she'd only sell 1 or 2 a day. Carrie wondered if her designs were the problem, so she doubled down on sketching new styles, staying up later each night. One day, as she sold headbands, she ended up falling asleep leaning against a wall. When footsteps approached, she woke up instinctively. "Hi there, you looking to buy something?" she said. But when she glanced up, she froze. It was Linda. She quickly stood up. Usually she was so eloquent, but for the first time, she didn't know what to say. Linda didn't say anything. She just started walking in the other direction. Carrie didn't dare to say much either. She quickly gathered her things and followed with her head down. But as they walked, they weren't heading home. Carrie felt anxious. Just as she was about to ask, she saw Linda stop. "Put it down here." She looked up and realized they were in a bustling market. Although it wasn't as crowded as the one she'd been to before, it was much busier than the usual streets she frequented. Carrie stared blankly at Linda and asked softly, "Linda, aren't you mad?" "Mad?" Linda replied with a cold snort, her back to Carrie. "You come back late every day, and I can't find you when I look for you. What if something happens to you one day, and I didn't even know my assistant was gone?" Carrie's eyes welled up with tears as she couldn't help but hug Linda. Linda was stunned for a while, but eventually reached out and embraced Carrie. "I saw that missing persons notice. For a young girl like you, to run so far alone, you must have been desperate. From now on, you're my granddaughter. As time goes on, no one will question it." Carrie nodded earnestly, hugging Linda tightly. Since that day, every time a customer came to the sewing shop, Linda would casually mention Carrie's identity. Soon, the neighbors learned that the new helper girl was actually Linda's granddaughter. As for the past, people just thought it was Linda's quirky nature, frustrated with her son for being away for so long. And Linda, seeming to truly accept Carrie as her granddaughter, began to insist she learn sewing and embroidery techniques. Even though Carrie had a knack for it, starting late meant she couldn't meet Linda's high standards right away. Linda was strict and didn't hold back with her criticism. Carrie didn't know how many times she cried, wiping tears with a cloth that dried and got wet over and over. For months, Carrie juggled preparing for the college entrance exam with learning sewing and embroidery, all while finding time to sell headbands and little accessories she'd made. She had no time to rest, and would often fall asleep the moment she hit the bed. Those things that once kept her awake at night began to fade away. Luckily, as time went by, things started to improve. She caught up on her studies, Linda's praise became more frequent, and Carrie even started getting big orders for her handmade items. Time slipped away like water, and the life she dreamed of was gradually coming true. In July 1982, during graduation season, the air was filled with the sounds of cicadas and waves of heat that were hard to bear. Carrie had just finished taking group photos with her classmates when she bumped into Nolan, who was supporting Linda. She quickly approached, took the flowers from Nolan, and chided, "Why did you bring Grandma out in this heat?" Linda dabbed Carrie's sweat with a cloth, speaking softly, "Today is your graduation day. I insisted on coming, so don't blame Nolan. Let Grandma take a good look at you." Carrie gently hugged Linda and said, "Graduation isn't such a big deal. It's too hot, and you might get heat stroke. Grandma, you need to take care of your health." This marked Carrie's 5th year in City A. Linda, despite her eccentricity, grew fond of Carrie and treated her as her granddaughter. Originally planning to attend a university in City C, Carrie decided on a university in City M, equally prestigious, to stay close to Linda. Unexpectedly, after the exams, Nolan visited Linda and happened to meet Carrie. That's when Carrie learned about Linda and Nolan's grandfather's past friendship. Linda's children hadn't disappeared, they'd died during a mission. All these years, Linda refused to believe it, thinking they were just upset and didn't want to see her, and she avoided contact with others out of spite. When Nolan heard Linda suddenly had a granddaughter, he worried someone was taking advantage of her, and came to check, only to find Carrie. Once Linda saw the connection between the two, she couldn't help but acknowledge fate. In the following years, they had more interactions and eventually grew close. After the graduation ceremony, Nolan took Carrie and Linda to a restaurant they had reserved in advance. While Linda kept saying it was a waste of money, the smile on her face never faded. Halfway through the meal, Nolan asked Carrie, "Now that you're done with college, what's next? Planning to go home and visit?" Talking about going home made Carrie a bit uneasy. After the reform and opening up, City A developed rapidly. Carrie used some earnings from her headbands to start a small studio, then expanded it into a company covering clothing, accessories, and more. She made quite a bit of money over the years and sent some to her parents, but never returned home. She'd asked someone to check on things back home and found out that David still visited her family every holiday, making her lose the courage to return. Her father had been so firm about marrying her off to David, and going back might mean being pressured again. She didn't want to repeat her escape. With all this in mind, Carrie shook her head and said, "I don't think so. I'm planning to take Grandma to another city for a checkup and explore some business opportunities." When hearing about the hospital visit, Linda was instantly displeased. "What's the use of that for an old woman like me? I won't go. You focus on your business and don't worry about me." Seeing Linda being stubborn again, Carrie coaxed her helplessly, "Grandma, how is this a waste of money? Besides, haven't you always wanted to travel? Let's just treat it like a trip, all right? Everything else is secondary, so don't think much about it." Nolan was helping Linda with some food while trying to persuade her. "Carrie's right. It's a great idea for me to go along. While Carrie's busy, I can show you around. It'll be fun." Carrie was surprised. "But didn't Uncle say you had to stay in City A?" Nolan just waved his hand, looking a bit helpless. He can talk all he wants, but Grandpa's the one in charge. Gotta listen and head back. With Nolan joining too, Linda finally agreed to go. Carrie still had a bunch of stuff to wrap up, so Nolan took Linda ahead, and she planned to join up later. By the time Carrie finished everything, half a month had gone by. She stepped off with her suitcase and sat on a nearby bench, waiting quietly. Originally, Carrie planned to hang out with Linda a bit once she got there. But the news about Linda's visit got to Grandpa. He insisted on having a meal with them. Carrie couldn't say no. Nolan offered to pick her up, but got pulled into something last minute. So Grandpa arranged someone else. Carrie wanted to decline, but Grandpa was firm, so she had to go with it. Thankfully, she didn't wait long before a guy in black came running over. "Hi there, you must be Carrie?" Carrie quickly stood up and asked softly, "Are you Jason?" Jason scratched his head, a little sheepishly. "Yep, that's me. I'm here to take you where you need to go." They chatted while getting into the car. But as Carrie opened the door, a familiar face caught her eye. Seeing who it was, Carrie froze, nearly dropping her suitcase. Jason, unaware of Carrie's reaction, explained, "This here is our captain, David. The old man had something for him to do, so he picked you up along the way." Noting Carrie's silence, Jason cautiously asked, "Carrie, do you know the captain?" Carrie's past flashed through her mind like a slideshow, leaving her breathless. Steadying herself, she replied in a strained voice, "No, I don't. Let's go." Once in the car, Carrie kept a bit of distance from David. She had imagined many scenarios for meeting David again. In the village, at an office, even just a quick glance on the street. But none of those prepared her for this unexpected situation. Even after 5 years, the depth of her past hurts was clear. She thought she'd moved on, grown. But seeing David brought back deep resentment. Sitting at the wheel, Jason sensed something was off. He glanced at David, who was as expressionless as ever, but couldn't figure it out, so he left it alone. David, however, wasn't as calm as he seemed. Knowing Carrie wasn't fond of him, he subtly slid closer to the door. But Carrie's faint scent stayed with him, making her white shirt stand out even more. He tried hard not to make any sudden moves, not wanting to scare her off. For 1,873 days, David had no news of Carrie. 5 years ago, he wasted away at home but decided to take Becky to college, hoping to find Carrie. He planned to return Becky's acceptance letter if Carrie would come back with him. Even if it was unfair to Becky, he didn't care. Realizing he couldn't lose Carrie was a turning point. If she wanted to study, he'd let her. He refused to believe she no longer had feelings for him. On their way, Becky chatted nonstop. But David heard none of it, only thinking about what to say to Carrie. Apologize, admit mistakes, or just act normal. In the end, he realized what he wanted to say most. "After you graduate, let's get married again?" But he never asked. When they reached the college, they found out the acceptance letter was voided. "This student informed us they can't attend due to family issues and asked to void it," the admissions officer explained, eyeing them suspiciously. "Where'd you get that letter, anyway?" Just a few words, and Becky was devastated. Clutching the letter, she pleaded and cried, "No, I didn't void it. Please, I worked so hard to get in. Can't you reverse it?" Frantic, she turned to David, seeking his support. "David, tell them. It's mine. I never voided it. Why aren't they letting me in?" David didn't move, fighting to understand why. Why would Carrie void the letter? She wanted university so much that she left everything behind. Would she really just give it up? He faced the admissions officer, keeping his panic in check, and asked, "Did Carrie personally request the void?" The response was vague. They confirmed it themselves. The uncertainty just added to David's anxiety. He pushed past Becky and put up missing person notices everywhere. For a whole 5 years, the only proof that Carrie was okay was the money regularly sent to her father Carrie's account. David thought he'd never see Carrie again in his life, but he never expected to bump into her under these circumstances. She didn't look destitute or miserable like he imagined. Instead, she seemed composed, calm, and unexpectedly vibrant. It was a version of Carrie he had never seen before, more lively and full of life. Everything was a reminder of a fact he was reluctant to admit. Carrie seemed better off without him. A strange frustration felt like a lump of cotton stifling David's heart, making even breathing seem difficult. Suddenly, the car stopped, and Jason turned to look behind. "Carrie, David, we're here," he said. Carrie nodded, then eagerly swung open the car door. David looked at his empty hand, paused for a moment, then also got out. As soon as Nolan saw Carrie, he immediately approached. "Carrie, you're here. Linda is waiting for you inside," he said. He wanted to say more, but when he caught sight of David getting out of the car, he suddenly stopped. Jason hurriedly explained, "Nolan, Mr. Oldman just needed something from Jason, so he joined us." Nolan glanced at Carrie and nodded. "If Mr. Oldman wants to see someone, I certainly can't stop him. Carrie, let's go." He shielded Carrie, his slim frame blocking her from David's sight entirely. As a fellow man, David could sense Nolan's hostility and protective instinct. Nolan's defensive attitude made it clear that he knew something about David and Carrie's relationship. What unsettled him more was Carrie's attitude. She had been so cautious with him, but was unexpectedly relaxed around Nolan. David clenched his fist, his mind racing. Jason next to him didn't notice David's change. Watching Nolan and Carrie's figures as they walked away, he couldn't help but remark, "Nolan and Carrie really make a good match, don't they? I heard Carrie is still a college student." Hearing this, David abruptly stopped in his tracks. Jason, startled, quickly said, "David, I forgot you don't like hearing about these things." "I'm sorry. Are they together?" David asked, gazing at Nolan's back. Jason hesitated a moment, then stammered, "Not yet, I think. I heard Nolan hasn't confessed yet, but he's been waiting for her for 5 years. It should be soon." 5 years? David froze, a thought flashing back to Carrie's disappearance 5 years ago. The village was so far from the station, with no ox cart or bicycle, yet Carrie managed to catch a train in less than 6 hours. The words of the homeless man echoed again in David's mind. The identity of that strange man from 5 years ago was suddenly revealed at this moment. Suppressing his emotions, David quickened his pace to catch up with the others. Left behind, Jason looked puzzled, muttering, "David usually hates people prying into personal stuff. Why is he asking about it now?" Meanwhile, Nolan wasn't as calm as he appeared. Frowning, he said, "I didn't think to ask Jason if someone else was with you. He didn't do anything, did he?" Carrie shook her head, recalling David's attitude. "It's fine. Besides, it's been 5 years. He's probably forgotten about back then. He's likely with Becky now. Why would he care about me?" Seeing Carrie unbothered, Nolan swallowed the words at the tip of his tongue. Being a man, he could see beneath David's stoic exterior to the desire in his eyes when looking at Carrie. Like a person who'd been in the desert for 7 days and finally saw water. But he decided against telling Carrie. He didn't want Carrie to hate David. Hate often came from caring too much. Ignoring David might mean she no longer cared about that past relationship. How could an abandoned ex-fiancé, someone who didn't even have a marriage certificate, compete with him? Thinking of this, Nolan became more cheerful, the frustration of encountering David all but gone. Mr. Oldman and Linda waited in the living room, faces full of joy when they saw Nolan arrive with Carrie. "This is Carrie, right?" Mr. Oldman asked, smiling at Linda. "You know, she does look a bit like you." Carrie took out the prepared gift. "Grandpa, this is a little present for you. It's not much, I hope you don't mind." "If he does, I'll take it," Linda joked, reaching out, but Mr. Oldman swiftly took it with a chuckle. "You haven't changed from your bandit ways. What Carrie gives me I'll keep." As they spoke, Mr. Oldman noticed David's arrival. "Oh, I nearly forgot about some business to deal with. Nolan, why don't you take Carrie and the others to the side room? I'll join you soon." Nolan nodded and led Linda and Carrie to the other room. As they passed David, Carrie thought she saw David's hand reach towards her, but it was only for an instant. When she looked again, David's hand was casually by his side. Not thinking much of it, she soon put it out of her mind. About half an hour later, Mr. Oldman finished his work and invited them back for some casual talk, eventually convincing Carrie and Linda to stay for dinner. Linda and Mr. Oldman, being old comrades, had so much to catch up on. Carrie and Nolan listened to many old stories, and as they got more animated, she had a few drinks in the spirit of things. By the time they were done eating and chatting, the sky had turned dark. The old man wanted Linda and Carrie to stay overnight, but they weren't really into it, so they both turned him down. Since they refused to stay, the old man asked Nolan to take them back to the hotel. Linda had a rare drink that night and got all chatty, hanging on to Carrie and rambling. Carrie found it both funny and helpless, coaxing Linda as she listened. All right, she said. We'll just sit here nicely and get some sleep in a bit. Nolan chuckled at Carrie's effort to placate Linda. You two have such a great bond, he mused. As night fell, streetlights popped on, and the streets bustled with people and cars. It was lively for sure. The car stopped, and both Nolan and Carrie helped Linda out. Just as they were about to head into the hotel, Carrie caught sight of David standing nearby. Carrie didn't want to deal with him, so she turned to Nolan. Forget him, let's get Grandma inside to rest. He can stand there all he wants. Nolan shook his head and said quietly, he's trouble for you. I'll handle him. You take Linda up. Nolan called over a hotel staff member, gave them some cash, and had them help Carrie get Linda upstairs. Seeing Nolan insist, Carrie nodded and reminded him be safe. Don't bother talking if he won't listen. Nolan watched Carrie enter the hotel, waiting until he saw the room lights turn on. Then he looked down and saw David approaching. What are you doing, playing the stalker now? Nolan mocked. David looked at the room with the light on. It's the best hotel in North City. Didn't need to stalk, just figured you'd stay here. Nolan chuckled sarcastically. No wonder Carrie doesn't mention you anymore. Do you think she's incapable of doing things on her own? Carrie booked the hotel, and she paid for it herself. David's breathing got heavy as Nolan pointed out just how out of touch he was. Nolan, how long have you known her? You think you know her so well? David snapped. I've known her for 20 years. What are you to her? For David, who usually kept his cool, this was a rare outburst, only the second since that incident with a homeless guy. Nolan wasn't impressed. 20 years, and you had to force her into a sham wedding. Didn't even file a marriage application. No status at all. Looking quite smug, Nolan's words struck a nerve, and in a fit of anger, David grabbed Nolan's collar. If it weren't for you, Carrie would have been my wife. Stop it, came a shout. Carrie had dashed over, pulling David's hand away and pushing him back. David, we ended things 5 years ago. What's your deal? Carrie was defensive, standing between him and Nolan. David saw Carrie's protective stance and it hurt. He steadied his breath, holding back his frustration. Carrie, we were married. He tricked you and tore us apart for 5 years. Wake up, David. Carrie fired back coldly. Nolan didn't trick me, and he didn't drag me away. It was my decision from the start. I wanted to leave you. As for the so-called marriage without a license, it's nothing. You keep this up, and I'll call the cops. With that, Carrie took Nolan's hand and walked away. David instinctively wanted to follow but stopped himself. He just stood there as their silhouettes faded from view, feeling a bitter pain spreading through him. David couldn't understand, did Carrie's push really hurt that much? Or was it something else squeezing his chest so tightly it was hard to breathe? He stood there for a long time, long enough for most streetlights to go out and the last cars to disappear from the road, before heading back. When he finally reached the apartment building, Becky jumped out, having waited for him. David, what took you so long? Did something happen? Becky asked. David looked at her for a while. He didn't mention running into Carrie. Nothing. How's prep for the exam going? Back when her college acceptance got voided, Becky had to return to her village. David found a way to bring her back to the city, but Becky's mom was set on marrying her off, using the dowry for her brother's bride. Desperate, Becky turned to David, who'd thought about paying the dowry himself. Yet Becky's mom was stubborn, so Becky came back pleading. I don't want to get married. I want to go to college. Marry me. I promise I won't be a burden. I'll study hard for the entrance exams. To Becky's surprise, David, who had always been there for her, turned her down. My wife is Carrie. I can't marry you. But she left. Becky cried, clutching at David's arm desperately. Plus, you two don't even have a marriage certificate, so you can't call yourselves husband and wife. David, you promised my dad you'd take care of me. Are you going to break your promise? David didn't break it. He used all his savings to buy Becky 5 years. As long as Becky got into college in those 5 years, her mom wouldn't force her to marry. 5 years have passed, and this is the last chance. Becky understood what David meant, and she stopped in her tracks, looking a bit defeated. David, is this the only thing we have to talk about? A wave of exhaustion hit David out of nowhere. He raised a hand to his brow. It's late. You should rest. I'm tired. I'm going to bed. He ignored Becky's protests and headed upstairs. Becky watched David's back, biting her lip unconsciously. Ever since Carrie left 5 years ago, David's attitude had changed a lot. If she hadn't guilt-tripped him, he probably would have stopped caring about her a long time ago. She thought that 5 years would soften any hard heart. But David was like a brick, never agreeing to anything, and today, he's so cold to her. Becky had a gut feeling that something must have happened to David today. After dragging Nolan to the hotel, Carrie quickly let go and looked at Nolan apologetically. Sorry for the trouble just now. Nolan felt the warmth where her hand had been, and casually put his hands behind his back, smiling. No need to stand on ceremony. Looks like David isn't ready to give up on you just yet. I'll stick around for a while. Carrie shook her head, a bit helpless. You're on a rare vacation. You shouldn't waste it on me. Besides, you've already helped me a lot these past few years. It's really no trouble at all. Carrie said it sincerely, looking at Nolan with eyes clear as a lake, without a hint of playing hard to get. Watching her, Nolan zoned out for a moment. Something wrong? Noticing Nolan's dazed look, Carrie asked curiously. He snapped back to reality, smiled and ruffled her hair. It's no trouble at all. And since Linda is an old family friend, I've got to look after you. You're going to the hospital tomorrow, right? Just wait for me. Before Carrie could refuse, Nolan turned and walked away quickly, as if escaping. Carrie felt something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She headed upstairs and went back to her room, only to find Linda standing by the window. Grandma, you're still up? Carrie walked over quickly and followed Linda's gaze, spotting Nolan glancing back. But from where Linda stood, she wouldn't be visible to Nolan. Carrie, is that young man the one you almost married? Linda held Carrie's hand tightly and asked seriously. Carrie took a deep breath, unable to keep it from Linda any longer, and nodded. I didn't expect to bump into him after 5 years. But I made it clear to him, so there shouldn't be any more trouble. Linda gently stroked Carrie's face, speaking softly. Carrie, you don't know much about men. You won't give up. And there's something else I need to ask. What do you really think about Nolan? Carrie was confused, holding Linda's hand. What's he got to do with it? David is David. I can handle our situation. I don't need his help. Seeing Carrie so clueless, Linda shook her head in disbelief. Who said anything about David? Didn't you notice Nolan treats you differently? This goes beyond your average friendship. Seeing Carrie stunned, Linda patted her hand. I'm sleepy. I'm going to bed. You think about it. Carrie was taken aback for a moment and wanted to assist Linda, but Linda pointed outside, indicating not to worry about her. Looking puzzled, Carrie turned around to see Nolan standing still, staring in her direction. Even though he was a bit far, Carrie felt Nolan was smiling at her, and she subconsciously smiled back. In that instant, Linda's words echoed in her mind again. Between a man and a woman, if not regular friends, what else could they be? Since her second chance at life, Carrie had been on edge all the time. She feared getting pulled back into marriage, scared her hard work would go to waste, afraid everything after her rebirth was just a dream. Sometimes Carrie questioned herself. What was she so scared of? She asked this many times, and each answer boiled down to not wanting to lose herself. In her past life, she had no self-worth, giving everything only to be rejected by everyone. She was tired of it. That's why she never considered marriage. But now that Linda asked, she felt a bit lost. Her thoughts all over the place. Even her dreams grew chaotic. It felt like she was stuck in mud, stumbling around, unsure when she might fall into a deep pit. In these suffocating moments, she remembered something from the past. It was a month before her college entrance exam. Nightmares plagued her. Dreams about her past life, David's mom's torment, rude siblings, and all sorts of chaos wrapped around her like vines, leaving no room for anything else. Over time, the vines turned to strings, manipulating her like a puppet worn out from running. The strings cut into her, stripping her of grace and beauty. Everyone just blamed her for not being hardworking or determined enough. No one even glanced at the threads tied by those truly responsible. These nightmares made Carrie lose a lot of weight, and her spirit dimmed quite a bit. Right then, Nolan suddenly showed up in front of her with a morning glory in hand. Someone said this flower has magic and can chase away nightmares for a good night's sleep. Just for you. Carrie looked at the morning glory still glistening with dew and couldn't help but laugh. Aren't you the warrior of materialism? Playing with this flower, watch out or Grandpa will scold you. Unexpectedly, Nolan pulled out a small bag and smiled at Carrie. As a warrior of materialism, I've prepared some medicine for you. Don't worry, I checked with a doctor, there are no side effects. It won't affect your studies. As for these morning glories, consider them a rare instance of idealism for this materialist warrior. Anyway, no harm done. Nolan waved the flower around and handed it to Carrie. Reluctantly, Carrie took it, tried to pay, but Nolan refused. Nolan had only a 7-day break, and every day he brought her fresh morning glories. Carrie, though teasing him for believing in this stuff, bought a little vase just for them. Whether it was the medicine or the morning glories, Carrie really stopped having nightmares and could sleep soundly. She thought the flowers would stop after 7 days, but on the 8th day, a kid showed up with some and said seriously, "These are from Brother Nolan for you, miss." Carrie tried to decline, but the kid insisted. Nolan helped pay my grandpa's medical bills, and he said this is my way to repay him by giving you these flowers. If you don't take them, he won't pay. With that, Carrie had no choice but to accept. Later, when she called Nolan about it, Nolan shrugged. The kid's too proud. He couldn't just take without giving back. It's a win-win solution, don't you think? Can you bear to refuse a kid? His imitation of the kid's tone made Carrie laugh. It wasn't until after her exams that Carrie learned there was a place with morning glories near the kid's home. But it was 10 kilometers from Nolan's place. It only took the kid an hour, but Nolan had to spend 3 hours daily. Those 7 days, he woke before dawn to get the freshest and prettiest morning glories just for her. Those morning glories seemed to work their magic again. The chaos in her mind drifted away, and a peaceful purple and white slowly filled her dreams, letting Carrie finally drift off to sleep. For days, David didn't show up in front of Carrie again. Carrie, focused on work, also took Linda for a checkup. Luckily, after reviewing, the doctor said Linda was simply overworked due to her age and needed a good rest, nothing serious. Leaving the hospital, Linda couldn't help but grumble. Told you it was nothing serious. Wasn't this a waste of money? Money's hard to come by these days. Young ladies should spend it on themselves, not waste it on an old lady like me. Nolan supported Linda and reassured her. Linda, don't worry about the money. We've got plenty, not like we'd run out because of you. Just as they were about to get in the car, a familiar voice called out, "Carrie." At the sound, Carrie froze. She turned to see David and her parents. Her mom rushed over as soon as her eyes landed on Carrie, on the verge of tears. "Carrie, it really is you. Let Mom take a good look at you." Feeling awkward, Carrie tried to keep her voice steady. "Mom, what are you and Dad doing here? If we hadn't come, were you planning on never coming back?" Her father strode over, glaring warily at Nolan. "David told me you're the one who led Carrie away, didn't you? Do you realize I could call the cops?" Carrie's mom tugged at her dad and scolded. "What are you talking about? We shouldn't have driven Carrie away in the first place. Who was it that regretted it afterward? We've just found her. Do you want to push her away again?" He shot a glare at Carrie's mom. "I thought something terrible had happened to her. Turned out, she just took off on a whim. Running off with another man. She'd have been done for back in the day." "Enough." Linda's voice cut through, her eyes blazing as she glared at Carrie's father. "Pushing your daughter away and blaming her for it? After 5 years, all you have to offer is accusations? Have you asked how tough it was for her out there? How much she had to endure?" Carrie's dad stopped short, but then burst out. "So what if she did? She brought it on herself, she deserved it." As Linda was about to lose her temper again, Carrie held Linda's hand tightly. "Right. It's my fault. But I'd rather endure anything out there than go back and marry David. To you, a daughter who won't marry David might as well be dead, right?" Smack. All at once, Carrie's father slapped her hard. Everyone froze, none more shocked than Carrie's father himself. "Carrie." Nolan looked at Carrie with concern. Let's get that looked at by a doctor. Carrie stopped Nolan, holding back tears. No need. I'll take it. If he likes David so much, he might as well take him as his son and forget about me. I'm putting it out there. I'm not going back. And I will not marry David. I'll give you every cent I owe. But from now on, consider me dead to you all. After saying all that, Carrie hopped straight into the car with Linda. Nolan, with a face like thunder, looked at Carrie's parents and said, Uncle and Auntie, if you have even an ounce of familial love for Carrie, try to learn about what she's been through. If you still insist on your ways, then Carrie's decision to leave. I believe it might be the best decision of her life. Finished with what he had to say, Nolan turned and got into the car. After this whole ordeal, Carrie accepted Nolan's suggestion to stay at his place temporarily with Linda. But then somehow, Carrie's father found out who Nolan was and caused a huge scene, even alarming the old man in charge. The old man had been a wise figure all his life, but now he was furious at being accused of letting his grandson seduce an unsuspecting girl. However, once Felix explained everything, the old man stayed silent for a long moment before finally asking Carrie, Carrie, do you need me to step in and send them away? Carrie shook her head and replied, no need, I'll handle it. Despite saying that, the old man was worried that Carrie's father might imprison her again, so he invited everyone into the living room. It had been 5 years since Carrie last saw David and Becky alongside her parents. As they all sat together, the old man broke the silence first. It's been 5 years. To make sure you don't misunderstand your daughter, why don't you take a look at these? A photo album was brought out, showing Carrie's journey over the past 5 years. From selling headbands, learning embroidery, studying hard through the nights, to setting up a small workshop, receiving admission letters and winning awards. In every photo, Carrie appeared relentless and busy, yet her face was always filled with enthusiasm, vibrant and full of life. A stark contrast to the Carrie of the past. Without thinking, Carrie glanced at Nolan, who gave her a reassuring smile. Linda spoke up too. The first time I met Carrie was when she had just arrived in City A. She couldn't speak the local dialect and had her money stolen. A young girl, unfamiliar with the place, couldn't speak the language. You can imagine her struggles. I offered her money to go back, but she wouldn't have it. She told me she escaped with her life and wouldn't go back even if it meant dying outside. You kept forcing her to marry David. But did you ever ask why she didn't want to? Carrie's father exhaled and said, why else? Isn't it just pride, thinking she's too good for David? Who in 10 miles is better than David? Could we possibly harm her as her parents? Nolan responded, so in your eyes, your daughter is just someone so low, unworthy of anything better? Not worth education or a career, or living her own life. In your eyes, her worth is just to manage housekeeping and cooking, right? Carrie's father abruptly stood, angrily replying, is that for you to say about my daughter? And which daughter doesn't end up happy this way? Carrie stood up as well, meeting her father's gaze. Ask Mom if she's happy. She's been your good woman for decades. Ask if she's happy being cooped at home, cooking and cleaning. Her father fumed, slamming the table. Why wouldn't she be happy? She doesn't have to work, and has everything needed. What's the problem in doing some chores? Should a man do them? I'm not happy. A strong voice cut off Carrie's father. He paused, turning to see Carrie's mother standing up. The day Carrie left, I saw her. I helped her escape, hiding her tracks. Carrie is right, I'm not happy. Without you, I have hands and feet to fend for myself, and people would praise me for being capable. Yet married to you, all you see is me idling at home. You work hard, but I handle relationships, household chores, care for elders, yet I am criticized. Why should I be? Carrie's mother continued as tears fell. Taking a deep breath, she declared, I'm saying it here. If anyone forces Carrie to marry David again, I won't spare them. My life has been hard, but not my daughter's. She can graduate college and succeed in business. She's stronger than many men, so why must she give it all up? After this, Carrie's mother stood beside her daughter, protecting her with a fierce maternal spirit that had come 25 years too late. David got up hurriedly. I never wanted Carrie to give up everything. But you took my acceptance letter. Carrie fixed her eyes on David, sharply asking, David, let me ask you something. On that hill, Do you truly believe I pushed Becky? Becky's heart tightened as she looked at David. Seeing his silence, Carrie smirked bitterly. See, you know it's not true. David, you think I'm cruel, but truly the cruelest and most selfish one is you. You liked me, but since this marriage was something your mother forced on you, you denied your feelings, blaming me for everything. You ignored and belittled me, obstructing me at every turn when I tried to annul the engagement. You knew I didn't push Becky, yet accused me just to keep me from leaving, so you could seamlessly take away my acceptance letter. On one hand, repaying a debt, on the other, keeping me under your control. You keep saying you respect me, yet you want me to tolerate Becky because of her father's favor to you. But I'm an independent person, not your accessory. Why should your debt tie me down? David wanted to argue, but he opened his mouth and couldn't find the words. Carrie took a deep breath and spoke up. That's it. If you insist on continuing this mess, I escaped once, I can do it again. As long as I want to, I can wait till you're all gone. Her decisive words made Carrie's father suddenly look much older. He took a few steps back, sat down in the chair, and finally closed his eyes. You're right. The favor is my business, nothing to do with you and your mother. If you don't want to forget it. The drama finally ended. David still wanted to speak, but Becky shouted, forcing him to leave. As he passed by Carrie, she heard a soft "I'm sorry." Carrie had waited decades, 2 lifetimes, for that apology. Now that she heard it, it didn't stir any emotion. Carrie's parents wanted to leave, but the old man invited them to stay a while. Carrie stood under the eaves, lost in thought as she watched the birds on the trees. Nolan came up beside her, curiously asking, "What are you looking at?" Meeting Nolan's gaze, Carrie suddenly smiled. "I'm thinking this yard is a bit empty. What do you think about planting some flowers?" "Morning glories," she suggested. Nolan seemed suddenly bewitched, stammering, "Sure, yeah." Seeing Nolan like this, Carrie found it amusing. She leaned closer and asked, "So how long will it take?" Her near-explicit question made Nolan understand immediately. He gently held Carrie's hand and said sincerely, "As long as you want. A lifetime if that's okay." The end.